Hey guys, how is it going? My name is AK Rex, and I would say do not worry about the image you may be seeing right now in front of you. We will explain shortly what that means, and by we I mean myself and my friend from America, and also one of my moderators members. One of the moderators team members. That's what I was meant to say, and his name is John. John, welcome. This is the first time you are actually doing the speaking part on my channel after being subscriber. So would you mind just briefly telling us who you are and what you're doing here, just in general, so that people know what's going on?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for having me on our scene. Um, my name is John. I am an aspiring paleontologist, and currently I've been doing uh, I've loved dinosaurs since I could walk and talk, and ever since that I've been doing working towards actually becoming a professional paleontologist. So. Right now, and part of that has been working at local museums and doing work for that, and also just interacting with people like Arsene and company because I enjoy talking about this stuff. And to quote John Hammond from Jurassic Park, I believe that everyone has the right to enjoy these animals, and hopefully, my goal is to someday try and spread my love and passion for these animals to other people. So that's pretty much the gist for me, anyways.
And are you, if you don't mind, obviously sharing, are you doing any work paleontology related at the moment, or are you currently looking for work paleontology related?
So I currently do photography work at my local museum in their geology department. It's not necessarily anything to do with dinosaurs, but I do work with geologists and paleontologists there. I also do virtual volunteering with our good friend Jeffrey Bond at the George Eccles Dinosaur Park in Utah. And in my free time, I do personal research on my own, and doing. I've also done research with my professor with one of my professors at my university, where I've done work on fossil plants. Again, not very dinosaur related, but where I grew up and where I come from, dinosaurs are not very common, so to say. And a lot of my opportunities revolve around other aspects of paleontology that I find equally interesting, but certainly not to the same degree as dinosaurs.
Sure. Well, whenever people think of paleontology, dinosaurs are the first thing that associate with it. Even though dinosaurs by far were not the first thing that you know opened up the whole field and what it was founded on. Dinosaurs actually appeared later, if I remember correctly, in the history of paleontology in general. At least when we talk about when they were first named and recognized it's themselves. But dinosaurs were the things that you would probably agree popularized the field quite a lot. And but then, of course, if we are honest, things which were discovered before dinosaurs, which things which have been discovered before dinosaurs, are things like the plesiosaurs and things like that. They were at one point perhaps mistaken for being just basically aquatic dinosaurs, which obviously later it turned out they were not. So it would depend really what how do you look in terms of context. You know, at the time when it first started out, I guess you could say that they thought they were dinosaurs, so in a way they did start it out. But since we know that that's not the case, so then based on how we know about what we know now, it's probably fair to say that dinosaurs actually did show up a bit later. So unless I'm making any mistake here, feel free to correct me, obviously.
Would say you're on the money. I would also throw in there Charles Darwin's findings in when traversing South America and finding fossils in Argentina of giant ground sloths like Megatherium. I think also Toxodon and maybe Macrauchenia. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I know he definitely found some animals from down there before dinosaurs became super popular. And I also believe mammoths were quite popular before dinosaurs back in the Victorian age, when I believe there was a sculpture of a woolly mammoth that was displayed to the populace way back when. Um, Dinosaurs obviously took over as the main group of animals we think of when we think about paleontology, and in part because the largest members dwarf things like mammoths and megatherium and toxodon. And you've got carnivores that are even bigger than elephants, but the biggest ones, and they're just so unique and so different from everything that we've ever seen alive or other extinct animals. They are very much a unique group of animals that we have. I don't think we've seen before, and I don't think we'll ever see her again for millions upon millions of years, just because of what they were like, how they looked, how they acted, what their metabolisms were like. They were just they were a class of their own, really, despite being obviously related to crocodiles and birds and such.
Yeah, and of course, by the way, if you are guys interested, if you're new to the channel, please take a look at the videos that me and Dr. Jason Burke have done regarding some of the groups of reptilia, uh, which obviously means we will eventually get to some dinosaur groups as well as we go on. But in some general terms, we have covered a few already, so check them out as well. And in order to get a better context and understanding of what John just said, we have already covered birds and crocodilians, extant ones as in the present day ones. So this might potentially help you better connect the dots if you are obviously better connect the dots. I probably said something else which I didn't realize what it was. Sorry, for me it's been like for John it's probably still, what time is it at your place? Because at my place it's kind of getting a bit late, so I'm trying to keep myself focused so I don't go too crazy. So it's kind of the end of the day for me, if you know what I mean. So pardon if I sometimes break English language, to you and to viewers, obviously. So,
No problem.
yeah, is it like daytime over at yours? I believe
It's still daytime
it
over
is still
here.
daytime. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, since you are my guest and for the first time here, I'm mostly gonna give you the opportunity to talk. Let's just say more than I do. So, with that in mind, let's open up our first point. And first of all, let's actually discuss briefly what is the purpose of our video today. We have been obviously planning this for some time, even though we're still improvising primarily because I just like that style of delivery of videos. That's my choice. It's not because we didn't sit down and discuss, what are we gonna be doing and stuff like that. We did briefly, but I don't like scripted content personally, which is why I went with this style. Now, John, what is the purpose of this one? We said that we decided to cover reconstructions, but do you want to open up that path now and just explain what's the main reasoning and purpose behind this material that we're going to be presenting here?
Sure. I will start by, I guess we can start from the very beginning of what exactly is the definition of reconstruction. And I actually have Merriam-Webster up right now so that I can get a good idea as to what exactly a reconstruction is and what that means. So the basic definition is the action of reconstructing, the act or process of rebuilding, repairing, or restoring something. Now, I think for right now, stop right there because I think, in a way, we are sort of rebuilding and restoring what dinosaurs are, what they looked like, anyways, when we reconstruct them, be it skeletal or in the flesh. And so that's the basic idea of what a reconstruction is on just on a normal level. There's also a more technical version that typically applies to scientific reconstructions, which is typically what we do when we construct dinosaur skeletons and create them again, flesh them out, and actually make them appear like real animals. And that definition in Merriam-Webster goes a technical process by which scientific principles and techniques are applied to a physical evidence in order to create an accurate reenactment or understanding of a past occurrence or event, such as an accident. Now, in this case, we're not really reconstructing an event or an occurrence, but we're reconstructing animals, extinct animals. And I think this definition will still apply to that because what we're trying to do when we reconstruct dinosaurs is using the basic scientific principles that we use for everything else in science, as well as in conjunction with the physical fossil evidence that we have of dinosaurs. And then, if possible, and I do say this very, I guess you could say loosely, try and see if we can use modern day animals to fill in gaps. Try to see if what can we figure out that the fossil evidence cannot tell us, for reconstructing animals, especially in the flesh, because again, there is no living thing that really comes close to looking like a dinosaur. There's very loose analogs, I would say, but like say an emu or an ostrich is going to look very different from an Allosaurus or a T-Rex or even an Ornithomimus, which are considered the ostrich. It's part of the ostrich dinosaur family. And when it comes to scientific reconstructions, it's really a matter of you want to be as close to the fossil evidence as possible, and then whatever else you have, you base it off of reasonable speculation and reasonable plausibility that even if we cannot 100% prove it, we can absolutely say that it's a fair guess. And I think those words, plausibility and speculation, are going to come up quite often, potentially, because a lot of people, I feel, use those words sort of as a way to poo-poo criticism against their art, when it's obvious that they do not use those words properly, and the reconstruction, quote unquote, suffers as a result. So the basis of our talk today is going to be on reconstructions, what a reconstruction is, how to properly use reconstruction, and what really could be applied to what would be best defined as a reconstruction, depending on the criteria and such.
Okay, sounds fair enough. Now, one thing I wanted to make a quick disclaimer about prior to proceeding is that unless of course the names are gonna be included or signatures are gonna be included, in the images that we put up, we are simply interested in looking and giving our opinions and comparisons of specific depictions. We're not really interested in who was the person behind these depictions, at least for this video specifically. So we do not mean to withhold or discredit anybody by not specifying who the author is. But what I really mean here is that we just don't want to focus on the people behind the art as much as just what the art actually shows. Not even necessarily how good of a quality of artwork itself is in terms of how well drawn it is, for example, how good the lighting is. I mean, in some cases it might be applicable, but I don't really feel like this is going to be the main criteria. The main criteria is going to be the choice of depiction and what is being shown and how it's being done, in that sort of sense. So we're not interested in basically whether or not it's done by a person A or by person B or whatever Z. We are interested in seeing exactly what the artwork depicts and how well would it qualify to be an example of a reconstruction. And this is an extremely difficult criteria when it comes to that, because one of the things that I wanted to point out when it comes to reconstructing extinct animals is that because we don't have any living equivalents, we don't actually have any proper understanding perhaps of what exactly is actually missing in some cases, especially when it comes to soft tissue, because there is one side of it where we use only based on what we know existed in either their relatives or animals that are alive today and somehow have show evidence of equivalent biological aspects, if you will, for the lack of the better term. But I think this also doesn't help that, for example, if you put like an extra overgrown like piece of scalation about the eyebrows or something of sort, or on the snout, does this still qualify as a reconstruction, or are we potentially implying a very characteristically defining feature that could even differentiate them on a species level? Because in some cases, like the dwarf caiman species in South America, you have a Paleosuchus as a genus. One of them is Trigonatus and the other one is Pelpebrosus, the former being Schneider's dwarf caiman, commonly known as, and the latter be commonly known as the Cuvier dwarf caiman. Now, what a lot of people may not know is that some of their subtle differences actually relate to their positioning and possibly even shape of their osteoderms. And those are the things that are very difficult to understand and capture in dinosaurs, especially, for example, even their scalation could be potentially somewhat different from each other. Even in some cases you could just differentiate them by the color too. That could already be enough to define the species in some cases, I'm sure. But then in case of dinosaurs we don't have that evidence. Does that make sense?
Right. That makes sense to me.
So this means that we are pretty limited in the tools that we can, deploy in our views. So obviously this is gonna be mainly us giving our views and how close they fit those definitions that John has just outlined in order for us to establish the context. Phew.
Right.
Now that we have established that, hopefully clearly enough, then let's proceed. So what do we have in front of us? What are those three pieces, well, in this picture showing us, John? Because that's the one you've sent me, so I would like to ask you, what is this meant to be?
So the main point of this is these are basically the big three Morrison formation theropods. So on the right is Allosaurus, or what is supposed to be an Allosaurus. On the middle and the bottom there is supposed to be a Ceratosaurus that takes the meaning of Ceratosaurus, which is horned lizard, a bit literally, I think. And then on the left is supposed to be a torvosaurus, which I think I've told you, but I'm going to say it here. Kind of looks like an oversized Proceratosaurus with that, I can only assume, a keratinous growth there, meant to be a crest. And obviously we'll go into more detail, but kind of slipping out already. But what basically this is supposed to represent are the big three Morrison theropods from the late Jurassic of Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. And they are very they look very interesting. I will start with that.
Interesting is a very much of an understatement, and
yeah.
I presume that whoever the author is, as we agreed, we're not naming the authors here for the purpose of only focusing on the the depictions themselves. So, but the author decided not to include Saurophagonax because it's kind of still considered to be somewhat dubious taxon, and even maybe species, even if it were an Allosaurus. So I presume that for that reason it was not included to make it up to a big four of the Morrison. So we're only using big three, and it seems that also Allosaurus, whichever one it's meant to be, is represented by, in this case, by single species rather than the two species that actually are confirmed to have existed in the Morrison formation. Although slightly different timelines, meaning that, although I don't know if it's anagenetic, since I'm not actually familiar, this is where Jeffrey might potentially come in, and Jason, whether or not they replaced one another in a similar way as we see in the anagenesis case for the Splitosaurus sterosis and the Splitosaurus horneri, but it's a bit of a tricky thing. Apparently, Morrison has a very tricky thing when it comes to its stratigraphy. I'm not particularly well versed about it, but when we have Jeffrey and Jason on, we will probably be able to ask them in more detail. Unless, of course, you know something that you can tell. But
well, as far as I'm aware, Allosaurus jamadsoni comes before Allosaurus fragilis, so it's from older rocks. It comes from a bit earlier than Allosaurus fragilis.
Yeah.
Now, I will say the reason why I'm specifically just saying Allosaurus and not jamadsoni or fragilis is that, and I'm going to make a guess and say this is meant to be fragilis, the art itself doesn't really, at least not to me, do a good job of differentiating between jamadsoni and fragilis in a way that I can, other than potentially the crest size, which I'm going to say it might be bigger in fragilis, but don't quote me on that. I'm basing that off the top of my head from what I remember. But either way, I specify I specify just Allosaurus because I don't know what this is supposed to represent species-wise. Just genus is meant to be Allosaurus.
Yeah, I would say that we could just stick to the genus in generic terms, and I personally fail to see what this one is meant to be either, since it's very unclear. But I would like to begin by saying that I cannot, looking at this, call this a reconstruction, to put it bluntly. So, and there are many reasons for it. I'm not even gonna go into the fact that obviously it doesn't look like it was professionally drawn. It looks like more just a very general sketch up, perhaps, of something that might have been intended to eventually been, built up into a professional level type of work from a technical standpoint. What I will say is, again, it's a choice of depiction. There's absolutely nothing that I can think of. First of all, let's go on to Ceratosaurus. I am struggling to understand why does it have such a short, blunted snout, where Ceratosaurus was actually quite a long snouted animal in proportion. That's one thing I wanted to point out. And in case people are not aware of this, the biggest skull of Ceratosaurus is actually slightly bigger, at least maybe 10 centimeters or so bigger than the biggest skull of Allosaurus known. And to give you a bit of context, I will definitely put up an image, or maybe at least a specimen name that you can look up. I don't know for a fact that the specimen is mentioned in the Wikipedia, but there is no actual what's the best way to say it? What's it called? It's like there's no actual images accompanying it to actually show which one it is. But if I'm correct, the specimen is in a Museum of Natural History of Utah, probably.
I believe it's either in the Utah Museum of Natural History or it's at the BYU Museum of Paleontology, Brigham Young University of Paleontology. Those are the two that I remember there being some really big Ceratosaurus skulls, and one of those could be the specimen you're referring to. While you're looking that up real quick, I guess I can go on a little bit about the skull itself. Yeah, it's honestly, if you take away the horn, and I'll get the nose horn, and I'll get to the nose horn real soon. It honestly kind of looks like just a subadult or adolescent Allosaurus that also happens to have some really big osteoderms in the back of its neck there. It doesn't, if you take away the nasal horn, it doesn't really look all that different from the Allosaurus in the right. It just looks like a growth stage of it. Now, the thing about the horn, the nasal horn that defines what Ceratosaurus is, there's no way that it would have ever looked like that in real life. Ceratosaurus's nasal horn is not necessarily a horn, more so a crest that is flattened and is a bit more blade-like, and probably would not. I mean, one of the things about Ceratosaurus is that even though in older depictions it might have been shown using its horn for defense or for attacking prey. It it was not nearly like, it wasn't a horn in the same way like a triceratops horn is, or or a rhinoceros horn was. It was more than like, it was probably too thin and brittle to be actually used for defense or fighting, and more than likely was used for display, for males to attract females that way. And it's certainly not what the horn shown below looks like, because this looks like something that I could see on a Centrosaurus or another horned dinosaur, but not a Ceratosaurus. It's completely off base. Another thing that I think that is worth pointing out here with Ceratosaurus is that part of the reason why the skull looks so big and deep, compared to what Ceratosaurus actually looks like, is probably because of the lips. And I'm sure that's a bit of a cliche at this point regarding, whether or not you agree on lips or not. But in the case of Ceratosaurus, it's got some very big teeth. Even by dinosaur standards, Ceratosaurus has really long. I am very tempted to call them sword-like teeth, just because of how blade-like they are, and you're not going to be able to really put those neatly in a like with lips, unless you make them super big and super thick, like it was, um, like it got stung by a bee, is the analogy I always go with for these things. And it, in this case, it's obvious that the teeth look relatively small or hidden, and it's a common thing with lipping theropods, especially theropods like ceratosaurs and tyrannosaurs and torvos or more megalosaurs, which happen to have torvosaurus here as an example. Is that when you try and lip them, you have to either make the lips so big that they're basically impractical in a mechanical use by the animal itself, or you shrink the teeth. And if you shrink the teeth, that is literally committing an inaccuracy for the sake of putting out lips. And that right there is blatantly going against what a scientific reconstruction is all about. When you shrink the teeth to support lips that may or may not have been on the dinosaur in the first place.
Right. So what I wanted to say as well, first of all, of course, yes, I'm in full agreement that this does indeed mean that you are already putting yourself in a position where you have to modify the skeletal features of the animal in order to justify a certain soft tissue reconstruction. And I personally fail to see how it's justified to do that. So, for example, there's nothing that suggests that it's, distorted via preservation to the point where, it needs further modification. I would like to see how this would be justified in the first place to do that, or shrinking teeth specifically. I mean,
Right.
how can you just go out there and make the teeth smaller where they clearly were not? And well, you know what I mean. It's basically like you're already tampering with existing evidence, and just so you can fit your own, idea onto it somehow. And as you correctly pointed out, the horn itself, the nasal horn, it also it gives it a completely wrong impression that it's somehow supposed to be that round cross-section type of horn. It looks like that to me, and it's in no way consistent with what is actually known from the Ceratosaurus skull. And there is, as you correctly pointed out, I was indeed looking for the skull specimen, and to my at least recollection, of course, if anybody is not sure, then feel free to verify what I'm about to put out here. But there is indeed a big skull of Ceratosaurus in the Museum of Utah, which is abbreviated as UMNH-VP 5287. That's the specimen. In fact, it's not just a skull. I think it's actually a partial skeleton. for sure. So
Okay.
the skull is part of it, but there is more than just the skull. Now, the skull picture I'm going to put out here. This is probably a replica. I don't know if it's actual skull or if it's a replica, but some people might recognize it potentially. And the skull itself is quite a long, like you will see that it's relatively, I wouldn't say it's deep, it's kind of your, what would the best way to put it? It's still relatively slender in comparison to what this model, quote unquote, that is being presented in this image that we have that we've had prior to that. So I have sent you in our chat the image of the skull because you don't have the screen in front of you, the display. So look,
Gotcha.
So open this one up and you will see what I'm talking about. This is the biggest Ceratosaurus specimen probably known, along with possibly the other one that is known as Dentisulcatus, which I believe is just an individual variation of Nasicornis, which has actually even been a paperwork produced that debunks the idea of multiple species of them anyway. So it debunks Magnicornis, it debunks Dentisulcatus as well. So all of them, as far as we are aware of, are just Nasicornis with variations. And if you have the skull image in front of you, you can see that it's not nearly as deep as this image there implies. Not to mention that the crests that are the just in front of the brows, they are postorbital, if I'm correct, right? The postorbital lacrimal, in fact, that's what they're called, right? Lacrimal horns or lacrimal crests. They are not going backwards to the point where they just go completely over, the eyebrows, like that other image suggested. So if I go back to that image again, we are going to be seeing exactly what I just described, and it's going way above and even almost behind that eye socket, basically, which is just basically wrong at this point. It's just plain wrong. I don't have any other way to put it.
Yeah, pretty much. Actually, if you take away the crest and the horn, you would have it would be much closer to an Abelisaur, which Abelisaurs actually did have short. I've always described them as a bit like dinosaur equivalents to pit bulls or bulldogs with the kinds of faces they had. But Ceratosaurus, even though it's more related to Abelisaurs and other theropods, it distinctly does not have the same kind of facial morphology as Abelisaurs. So, yeah, I feel like it's the worst of the three, I would argue, based on the fact that the nasal horn is just so off from what we know of what Ceratosaurus was like.
I think even the skull itself is way off as well, so that's one of the reasons why I would say, because if you look at the torvosaurus shape, at least of the snout, and the head in general, and the allosaurus general shape, they are, in terms of the overall shape, they're actually surprisingly not that far off overall. They are still miles off, but not nearly as bad as Ceratosaurus.
Right. And I guess on that, if you don't mind, I was going to move on to the torvosaurus here.
Yeah, feel free.
Which it actually shares some of the same issues that the Ceratosaurus does, because torvosaurus has really, really big teeth in its jaws, and it suffers from the same issue as the Ceratosaurus, where if you're going to lip this thing, you either have to shrink the teeth or you have to make the lips so big that they almost look like dog lips. And, dog lips make sense on dogs, but I don't think that comparing dinosaurs to dogs would be the best way to physically reconstruct them. And with that being said, another big issue that I have with this torvosaurus here is the crest. And when I say it looks like an oversized Proceratosaurus, I truly do mean that, because that's the kind of crest that I would imagine seeing on a either Proceratosaurus itself or a relative of Proceratosaurus like Guanlong. but Torvosaurus doesn't really have much that I'm aware of, any kind of evidence to support a crest or any kind of over-the-top um, features on the skull itself. It's actually very conventional looking for a theropod dinosaur. And actually, I think I would argue most megalosaurs have a very conventional looking head. Um, like not to call megalosaurs boring, but they certainly have probably the least going on their heads aside from the big teeth. And the fact that their heads were significantly more robust than allosaurs, which I've heard a few argue that that could be an adaptation for Torvosaurus and company using their skulls to um, more closer to like what Tyrannosaurus Rex and its relatives were doing, like very, very heavy hitting animals with big, strong jaws. Maybe not crushing bone, but certainly would have been using them in a different way from, say, Allosaurus or Ceratosaurus, given how A, robust megalosaurs were, and B, just how big their teeth and jaws were. So, but overall, the crest is the biggest gripe for me. There's also the lips that, I mean, the top jaw, I don't think the whole row of teeth is shown there, which I find kind of interesting. And then, I'm not sure if you saw this, but the nostril, it looks like a turkey vulture in a way, and I'm not sure if that's just because this was a SketchUp, and it could just be like, an honest mistake, but it looks like it's it's just the nose looks like there's nothing in between. Like you could see through it, or it's transparent.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if you get that impression.
this is something I noticed because see if you look on this, at least on the Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus, the idea of forward orienting nostrils has generally been very well supported by studies like the Whitmer et al. 2001, where he used the Tyrannosaurus Rex, by the way, for the demonstration. So look it up, Whitmer et al. 2001, or Google it together with nostrils or Tyrannosaurus nostrils. You will definitely find that study if you haven't looked at it already. But with Torvosaurus, I almost, like you said, I'm almost tempted to think that this is just a big gape there, like a big gaping hole right through its skull for some unknown reason, where it's meant to be the nostrils and the nose, technically. So I am definitely very surprised, to say the least, that this was not noticed, maybe, prior to making.
Yeah.
Like that tip at the end where it's supposed to represent the actual nostril hole makes it look like it's just a highlighted, fenestre border rather than actual nostril hole, if you will.
Right.
So
Right.
it creates that weird impression. And my other problem with it is, again, what are they actually... Obviously, if the images are in scale with each other, this is a completely wrong size on every level, if you can think of. So
Yeah.
that's one thing I wanted to point out, because Torvosaurus would have had the biggest skull of them all, and Ceratosaurus and Allosaurus, if going by the biggest specimens known, they would be approximately the same, with Ceratosaurus being slightly bigger, and as in bigger, slightly longer. By that,
Yeah.
I mean that the specimen, to my knowledge, at least that skull that I've showed, it's about 40. It measures at least 40 inches long, which means that it's based on a replica. So you can look up the skull replica of that specimen, or just basically look up Ceratosaurus skull replica, and you will find that the same specimen. And all of the sites, I believe, they show it as about 40 inches, while the Allosaurus largest skull, if only I could remember the nickname of the specimen, but Jeffrey definitely had the
It was either Ebenezer or Dracula.
no, the
think.
former one. What's the former one?
Ebenezer.
Yes, that's the one, and it's actually, I think, barely reaching 1 meter in length, so it's about 95 or 90 centimeters in length, with
Okay.
Ceratosaurus just slightly exceeding 1 meter. So they're not much different if you really were to go down to the nitty gritty bits. But it's still significantly, making big difference in terms of how people typically use the holotype as the base measure of Ceratosaurus, which was smaller than the bigger Ceratosaurus specimens that we know of as well. And while they may not be on the same length level as Allosaurus, they certainly were perhaps comparatively stocky, and their skulls, their heads, were about the same size as the biggest Allosaurus skull.
Yeah.
So this does put a little bit of a different perspective on the niche partitioning, but that's a different story. We're not going to discuss it here. We
Right.
might discuss it in one of our later installments, in our later segments, when we do some reviews for documentaries, which you guys should be looking forward to, because we're planning a whole new segment with John to do the discussion and comment and just general review of the various dinosaur documentaries. And the one that we are going to start from is going to be when dinosaurs roamed America. So it's been requested quite a few times already by a few people, and I believe that it's actually one that doesn't get a lot of attention and discussion going on, not nearly as much as Walking with Dinosaurs does, for example, or the other
Yeah.
BBC's Planet Dinosaur did. So I'm thinking that this is the one we should definitely start from, and then we will decide later what else. But anyway, I wanted to move on to the next image and show as an example of what I think could qualify as a fairly decent attempt to, in fact, not a fairly decent, but a pretty good, in my opinion, to put it mildly, attempt at reconstructing Allosaurus. And this particular one is actually Allosaurus jumansoni. And you do have that image, I believe. It's just
Yep.
an Allosaurus portrait. And if you look at how it is done here, minus the fuzz that I can see there, which I don't understand why the artist decided to include it. Maybe it's because whoever commissioned it, asked to include it. I have no
Yeah.
idea why that was. But you will notice some interesting features. So for one, this does actually look, first of all, reptilian, which dinosaurs in all respects were. They were reptiles. They were not just basically mutated looking dragon-esque turkeys, if you will.
Yeah.
They were first and foremost reptiles, and they were obviously also a lot more closer to their ancestors, so the more basal condition, if you will, which would not look like your typical bird, if you will. I don't even know what's the better way to put it, but I hope people get what I'm trying to make out of it. And this one here also, if you look at how the teeth are shown and how the jaws are being constructed. Now, if you look very carefully on the dentary, the lower jaw, look at the texture just below the tooth row, and you will notice that it's very well aligned and showing of the position where the upper teeth would fit when the mouth is closed.
Right. Yeah, that's another thing that I'll bring up about lips on dinosaurs and the process of how that it kind of opens a few can of worms that I've so far not been satisfied by the answers for. One of them being that when you have teeth, and I know this is Allosaurus, which compared to Torvosaurus and Ceratosaurus doesn't have super massive teeth, but I think this could apply to any kind of theropod dinosaur. When you have teeth of that size, um, and you have lips, you you would need to have very thick muscles on the lower jaw in order for the teeth to properly, as the word goes, slippage to basically slip into the lower jaw. Otherwise, what happens is that you risk the upper teeth literally slicing through the lips in order for them to fit, and um, it's that asks a huge question as to so how could they possibly be able to fit their teeth inside lips if they're so big that they could potentially slice through the flesh of the lower jaw. And in this case, it doesn't look like the Allosaurus has to worry about that because it's very um, there is no excess tissue on the dentary. It's just aligned with the teeth, and so when the upper jaw comes down, it's not going to do any significant damage to the lower jaw or the flesh there, because it's so well aligned.
Well, and the common excuse I hear for this is that, oh, but all modern day tetrapods have some kind of either lips or extra oral tissue that cover it, but that's actually not entirely true. That's a completely wrong approach, in my personal view, to this situation. You should really be asking yourself a different question. This is the classic example of when you ask the wrong questions, you will come up with all the wrong answers. And the right question to ask is, do we have any evidence of any archosauromorph showing any sign of extraoral tissue presence? Do we even understand why it is present in some of the other animals that are being used as a gateway and a ticket, if you will, to portray that feature on the dinosaurs? So I have not seen any answers that actually satisfy these uh, raised issues. You know, they don't address them, at least to the point where I can say yes, they make sense. It doesn't make any sense to me at all when people choose to do that. And I mean, you can believe whatever you want to believe, but if you are going to come here and make an argument for it, be ready to be met with a certain degree of scrutiny and opposition for all the right reasons, and rightfully so. I don't see any problem with that. The problem is that when you are creating this kind of model, and you don't have any way to justify it, don't go running to the bathroom crying. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the definition of what a scientific reconstruction is, it's the application of scientific principles with physical evidence. And in the case of dinosaurs, is obviously the third thing of reasonable speculation and reasonable plausibility. But it's primarily the first two, which is again principles and evidence. And if there's no evidence for something, and the basis for it is very flawed, you're not going to be able to properly use that as a justification for why you put something on a certain dinosaur. And in this case, it often happens to come down to lips, but there's plenty of other things, like, for example, a very extensive keratinous growths, like with the torvosaurus and allosaurus, and like, yeah, all three of the Morrison theropods. With this depiction here, there doesn't seem to be all that much. It's not as over the top in how big the keratin is. If there, you can even see there's any keratin there, and the crests of Allosaurus, which are predominantly what helps define Allosaurus from, say, Tyrannosaurus Rex or Ceratosaurus or Carnotaurus. The crests there look like of some reasonable and believable size, compared to what we saw in the previous image, where the crests look very big and very almost like lettuce, like they had like a bit of lettuce on the head there.
It does
But in
look
this
like a
case,
lettuce, yeah.
yeah, but in this one, it looks much more like crests that you could see on both the fossil skull of Allosaurus jamadsoni, and also, if you want to say that there's some keratin on there, I can believe.
So you
it, but
extend
it's
it a
not
little
over.
bit, basically.
Yeah, they extend a little bit, but it's not over the top. And if I saw this thing walking around, I could believe this to be a living, breathing dinosaur.
You could also potentially argue that maybe the nostril flesh bit there, maybe it should have been more scaly, or maybe it is indeed correct, or maybe the orientation of the nostril hole should be somewhat different rather than pointing like this in the sideways. Maybe it should be more downwards or more forwards or something else. So there are. I'm not saying that there aren't ways that some alternative models would necessarily be wrong. that this one is end all be all, but this is a good example of a very good attempt at reconstruction via doing artwork when it comes to a difficult thing that people underestimate when it comes to reconstructing soft tissue, because you are reconstructing something that there's nothing to compare, so you don't know what are you actually bringing back, if you will, because reconstructing almost it's like repairing, restoring something. But in many cases,
Right.
when it comes to dinosaurs, you don't actually even know what you're really restoring. And in this case, I believe the author did a fantastic job. And again, this is according to what we actually know and understand, which could also be wrong.
Yep. We could find something that completely changes our understanding of what an Allosaurus head looks like. And if that were the case, well, then that would make this inaccurate, and I'm willing to admit that. But we have to find that skull first, and we have to find that evidence first.
Precisely.
Um, so, um,
Well, in this
was
case,
it?
if you're happy, I would like to put up that sketch of a Ceratosaurus as a comparison example of what I think looks like a very good attempt, and it's a starter attempt, it seems to me. It's that yellow sketch of Ceratosaurus.
Oh yeah, that one for sure.
Yes.
Um,
And as you can see, that it does show what both the lacrimals would look like, what the front nasal horn should look like, the orientation and the posture of the nostrils, the teeth, the muscles on the jaws, everything is there, the neck proportion, everything is exactly as I would have probably expected myself. That if I wanted to make a model, a sculpture of a Ceratosaurus, uh, I would probably use something like that as a very good general guide in how it should be done. Obviously, this looks like a very incompleted work, but
yeah.
based on the initial outline, I can already see whoever is making this is on the right track.
Same, and I should also point out that compared to the first image with the three Morrison theropods, the yellow Ceratosaurus actually has very conservative-looking osteoderms on the back of the neck. Now, as far as I'm aware, Ceratosaurus did have osteoderms in the back of its
Yes,
neck, but
yes.
compared to the yellow one here, the one in the first image that we posted has very very big osteoderms that almost look like Godzilla plates on the back of its neck there, and they, as far as I'm aware, they were not that big from what I remember of Ceratosaurus osteoderms there, and they also look much more spaced out, whereas on the yellow one, they definitely look a lot closer together, and again, the yellow one just looks closer to what we know of what Ceratosaurus looked like.
I could
Than
maybe
this
make
guy.
an argument that there is a room to actually say that they could be bigger and a slight and maybe just a tiny bit more spaced out. But then again,
Sure,
it's
sure.
very difficult to know because yes, there have been osteoderms found associated with Ceratosaurus, but I would not be willing to bet that the skeletons found were articulated enough to the degree that it would actually put the osteoderms in the right place. But I don't know that. I am only guessing that that never actually happened, but again, I need to actually know for a fact how exactly were the specimens preserved first, whether or not they were articulated enough, or whether the restoration and placement of osteoderms is strictly hypothetical. Like we do know that they existed, they had them. There is evidence for that much. What I
Yeah,
think are not 100% sure of is the placement and the spacing. Size wise, you could potentially have some wiggle room to go bigger simply because they would still be like surrounded by some kind of tissue as well, which would enhance the size.
yeah,
But by how much is a good question.
yeah, yeah. You know what? In that case, then I'm gonna be neutral then on whether or not the osteoderms on the sketch of the Ceratosaurus there are accurate or not. And anyone who finds something more specific to clarify this, feel free to share in the comment section, and I will definitely check it out. but I just make a point of saying that the yellow one definitely has smaller and I guess less eye-catching osteoderms than the ones in the sketch here.
Yes.
So, um, would you like to move on to not to rush the conversation, but would you like to move on to another another possible one?
If you're happy with this, I have nothing else to add. I very much agree with the last point. I would definitely say that I feel like neutral position on my end would be the one that I would more likely to be taking. Which one would you like to go for next, John?
I'd like to go for the Pachyrhinosaurus, woolly Pachyrhinosaurus one. And this is something that I feel as though needs to be hammered more. I mean, some people might say it's a dead horse, but it needs to be said anyways. And actually, I'm going to preface my personal opinion of this piece by actually telling a quick story. So last summer, I was hanging out with one of my friends, one of my closest friends from high school, and he's one of those. We were just chatting about dinosaurs, and because he's not necessarily going to paleontology, or he's not necessarily the dinosaur buff that I am, but he's someone who finds him cool, and it's always a pleasure to talk to him about this. Anyways,
so he's like a casual sort of enthusiast, if you will, or is he slightly above the casual level, in your view?
I think I would say just below, and I only say that because I think he's sort of finds him fascinating thanks to me, a little bit. But with that being said, and one of the things and we had a very similar conversation about reconstructions, and he said to me, well, basically, so John, what you're telling me is that, are they making fan fiction? And I said that was very, very accurate to what I would describe some of paleo art, is that it comes off as fan fiction-y. And this piece right here of the woolly Pachyrhinosaurus is honestly probably the most, the closest I would say to being literal fan fiction, because it's not just the dinosaurs themselves that are very, very, at best, questionable, and at worst, very wrong. It's the environment. And I know the whole point is reconstructing dinosaurs, but a big part of why Pachyrhinosaurus paratorum is typically fluffed up in the way that this image shows is under the very incorrect idea that the Prince Creek Formation in Alaska was just this conventional boreal forest kind of habitat where there were these very harsh winters, and dinosaurs thus needed fur or feathers or some kind of filaments to keep themselves warm. When in actuality, the Prince Creek Formation was much closer to a temperate rainforest, something similar to what we see in the Pacific Northwest, Western South America, Tasmania, where it could have been cool and there could have been snow sometimes, but it wasn't like a frozen tundra or a very cold boreal forest. And so because of that, it's a very big monkey wrench in the idea that Pachyrhinosaurus paratorum, as well as other dinosaurs from the Prince Creek Formation, had any kind of integument, like, again, feathers, fur, or filaments to keep warm.
That is provided that they actually indeed can fulfill that function for these animals. And I'm talking about the fact that it also implies that we have to remember that whatever filaments we find over on dinosaurs that we know had them for a fact, I would be skeptical in regards to even the claims that Bell et al. Produced in terms of why we find certain animals, from Tyrannosauroidea with filaments, while the Tyrannosauridae proper, if you will, the proper tyrants of the late Cretaceous, why they are scaly, because they don't actually, in my opinion, reliably produce the satisfactory answers to those questions as to why. All we do know is that this is what it was. We don't actually, in my opinion, understand properly to be reliably able to answer this question as to why those were this way and those were that way. We just know that they were.
Yeah, for sure. And once again, this also asks the question of where is the evidence for Pachyrhinosaurus paratorum having this stuff on it in the first place? And the answer to that question, so far as I'm aware, is none. We don't have anything to support that Pachyrhinosaurus had any kind of woolly covering over it. There's no preservation of it in the fossils. There's no even bits or bobs or hints that could be suggested as that. There's nothing. It's just
There is something, but it's not supporting this model, is that centrosaurians actually do preserve the integument of their skin, and it's a scaly ceratopsid skin.
gotcha. So that hurts the argument even more
It
that we
does.
have
It does.
close relatives of Pachyrhinosaurus with scales um, compared to what we're seeing here, which again is very drastic in terms of the kind of integument this animal may have had.
I'm
So,
almost certain that if we ask somebody like Darren Tanke from the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Canada, he would definitely be able to refer you to some specimens. He's he Centrosaurans is like he knows them like his own 5 fingers on each of the hands, if you will, if I were to say it like that.
okay,
So
okay,
if you want Centrosaurans, he is your guy.
sounds good. I mean, slightly off topic, but I personally find Centrosaurians more interesting than Chasmosaurians, except for Triceratops. Triceratops is still my favorite ceratopsian, but then it's a bunch of Centrosauri.
I am torn
So,
50-50 still.
fair enough. I mean, they're both cool groups, but Centrosaurians just have a lot more going on to me.
Fair enough. Yeah, they do indeed. Yes, there's more, variations. Chasmosaurans do follow a more kind of general outline that they rarely stray off, if you will. They more or less follow the same baseline, in comparison to
Right.
Centrosaurans that seem to have diverged in more ways than one from one another.
Right.
But anyways, I would also like to insert like a small kind of promotion here of the older video that I have uploaded on the channel. If you haven't seen it, I will include it, if I don't forget of course, in the link in description, which is where myself and a few other people, both my moderators from the server and also Jeffrey and Jason themselves are included in that podcast. I believe it's actually 4 of us. It's me, Jeffrey, Jason, and probably Idness,
Yep.
who talk about this new paper that was released from Reprints Creek, describing a juvenile dromaeosaurid, I believe, and
Yes.
and we also use that video as an opportunity, in fact, to further address and debunk certain myths related to restoration of Prince Creek and its megafauna. So I would strongly advise to go there and get a better idea of what we are talking about, so we don't end up obviously dragging this on, since we're already past 1 hour, and if we continue going into every little detail like that, we might be here till morning.
Fair
So,
enough.
in any other circumstances, I would actually not mind that, but for now, I don't think I could afford that. So, is there anything else you wanted to add about the woolly Pachyrhinosaurus?
I think that pretty much covers it. I just wanted to make a point about the environment, which again is typically used as the go-to defense for Pachyrhinosaurus paratorum having filaments or feathers. And since that's clearly not true, then it really just it breaks down the whole thing from its base. It destroys the very foundation of that argument right then and there. And for that reason, I think that was the big thing I wanted to bring up, because again, putting feathers on Pachyrhinosaurus paratorum is not something I would consider to be a good way to reconstruct this thing. And I specify paratorum because we're obviously not talking about Lacustae or Canadensis, which were from Alberta, and more, again, not from a polar climate, so...
I will, however, say that they are its closest relatives, and
Well, that's true, that's true.
they are basically the same genus for all intents and purposes, so I would find it extremely difficult to be convinced, unless direct fossil evidence would show me that. I would find it very difficult to be convinced that Peratorum would exhibit a different type of integument from the other two.
Yeah, it would be
Not to
very
mention different from
drastic.
Centrosaurins as a whole.
Right. It would be very drastic of a change in morphology. Um,
Something that you would definitely need a lot of strong evidence to be able to justify if you were to
right.
go down that route, which I do not believe we actually have.
Right.
Now, and since you did mention Lacustai, allow me the opportunity to present you, and you have that image as well in the chat. I've sent
Yep.
it to you, and that's a portrait of Pachyrhinosaurus lacustai. And all you have to do is obviously change the horns on the top of the frill slightly, remove the spike on the down the bottom and the base of the frill, and change the shape of the bosses, and so you will roughly have a Pachyrhinosaurus peratorum, but everything else that you see here would generally follow the same rule, in my opinion, at least based on what is known from preservations of Centrosaurans. And there's been even paperwork done on reconstructing facial integuments of Centrosaurans out there, and
Yeah.
even though if you were to go to somebody like Darren Tanke once again, he would probably be able to sell you a bridge about it. So,
Gotcha.
yes, quite a drastic contrast in my opinion in depictions, and depictions is what we are looking for here to understand and respond. So this is what I can call a reconstruction of a Pachyrhinosaurus. Not Peratorum, obviously, I haven't found one for the Peratorum to be able to better illustrate for the purpose of the video, but I hope it's sufficient enough to make the point.
I would say so. I think that I should also point out that sometimes Lacustai and Canadensis get like sometimes Canadensis will be depicted with the spike. That's unique to Lacustai. I thought I'd just make that point because sometimes I see Canadensis and Lacustai like sharing very similar features, and the big one is the crest or the spike in the middle there. So, but yeah, I would agree. This is a perfectly reasonable reconstruction of a Pachyrhinosaurus lacustai.
And also, no horns like we've seen in some art of it. Like some people
Oh
actually
right,
made like
yeah,
extended horns, like they were as much as they would make really good looking potential fictional dinosaur for something like Skull Island lore from 2005 or 2004 King Kong.
yeah,
That is not something that actually is consistent with paleontology and what is known about these animals.
right, exactly.
So, I believe even Darren Tanke, once again, it's the third time I'm bringing him up here, but I'm hoping he's not sneezing or hiccuping while we talk, because he would be like, oh my god, is somebody spreading rumors? No, we're just
Yeah,
bringing up your name for the third time in our video, because, well, once we started Centrosaurans, it's inevitable to not bring him up at any point. And yes, he was very, very unhappy when he saw that going around again as of recently, because he was convinced that this was a dead meme, and it's apparently somehow somebody decided to give it another go around, and well, he was not very happy when he saw that, which was quite
yeah,
amusing to watch him go having a rant about it, but that's a different story for another time. So,
true.
um, so what else would you like to go into next? I'm gonna leave it up to you to decide which one do you want to go to next.
Um, I would say, you know, on a bit more positive note, let's look at the Alterinus picture that I put in there. It's the two green dinosaurs with
Yep,
the
I know
bright.
which ones it is. Don't
And I
worry.
think I thought I'd move to this one because you know, I think there's a lot of positive things you can say about it, but also it does highlight a few other things about reconstructions that like on the more speculative level, like for example, what this scene seems to be depicting is two males competing for mating rights with several females in the background. And the reason why I make that interpretation is that the two Alterinus, which I should probably clarify, Alterinus are relatives of Iguanodon from Mongolia, and have I think occasionally been referred to as the Asian Iguanodon, but they are not the same genus.
No,
They are
they're
close,
not.
but they're both right.
They're
But they are
basal
related.
hadrosaurs, I think, in a way. Like, they're not I don't know if they are actually hadrosauridae proper. But while you're gonna talk, I'm sorry if I interrupted, but while you're gonna
No, you're
talk, I'm
fine.
going to quietly look it up for you as we speak.
Okay, got it. So what we see here are two Alterinus. Both are a very lovely green, and they have crests that are bright, fiery orange and yellow. And obviously, these are things that cannot be shown from the fossil record. But in this case, I think it is understandable. This is where I go into reasonable speculation, because sexual dimorphism is very common in all sorts of animals. Um, Birds are probably the most obvious one. Mammals, typically, it's either going to be certain features or its size, because most male mammals tend to be bigger than females. Birds have male birds tend to be much brighter in color because they're there to attract females, and females are much duller in color and are not as lively patterned because they have to camouflage so that they can protect the eggs. Um, Reptiles, depending on which group you're talking about, there's sexual dimorphism in there as well, and it's not out of left field to imagine that female Alterinus or female dinosaurs may have been a little bit duller in color, and males had a bit more color to them to show either health or to distinguish themselves from females, or to say, "Look at me, I'm big, I'm strong. Um, would you like to mate with me so that I can pass my genes on to the next generation?" And with the hadrosaurs, numerous hadrosaurs, and at least in this case, maybe an iguanodont with um, Alterinus, hadrosaurs typically had structures on their heads, whether it's Parasaurolophus with its huge trombone-looking crest, or Corythosaurus with its hill-like crest on its head. I know there's others that exist out there, but those are the first two that come up in my head. They had these very weird structures on their skulls, and one of the possible reasons for them is for communication, but also for sexual display. And it's been obviously not proven, but it's been suggested that males would have had brighter colored crests than females, and that could have again allowed for females to look at them and say, "This looks like a very big, healthy male. I want him to be the one to father my offspring."
Yep.
And
Natural
and so
selection, yes.
Yep. And even though we don't know what colors these dinosaurs I don't think it's a bad idea to show some kind of sexual dimorphism in the crests, in the body. I think it's perfectly reasonable, and um, just in general, this piece right here shows, I think, it looks like a very good Alterinus depiction all around, but this is one of those times where it's like speculation isn't always bad. Um, and
Well,
here's where it can be
it
used.
kind of fits within the reasonable, you could almost say, allowance. Not that we necessarily are the arbiters of what is allowed or what's not allowed, but
Right.
um, it's kind of, what's the best way to put it?
It's in the realm of believability.
It is definitely believable, and I know that believability can also potentially be subjective. But if we are
Right.
to really rely on the baseline of how uh, these animals generally as a reptilia go about it, with few exceptions, where we have reverse sexual dimorphism, which by the way has not been documented in terms of the Archosauria outside of some of the avians, which basically, are the only quote unquote dinosaurs still alive today.
Right.
We don't actually have any evidence to suggest that any of them previous ones, or the more basal basically dinosaurs, the dinosaurs proper if you will, or even the avians of the past, of the groups that are already extinct and no longer are around, like for arachnids and stuff like that, that they have necessarily had and phenomenon of this reverse sexual dimorphism. So this is something me and Jason have discussed in our video about birds, which you guys should also check out. But in this case, for example, looking at this Alterinus, by the way, I looked it up as well, and it appears to be quite an interesting issue. Although the wiki article itself places it as a hadrosauroidea, so it's probably a basal hadrosauroid, but on the other hand, there are some descriptions of it mentioning that there are some contesting theories, especially once you go more basal. There seems to be a bit more controversy involved into where they all should fit. So once you go more basal than your normal Hadrosauridae, which would then be like your basal Hadrosaurids plus your Edmodon, what are they called? Saurolophins and Lambeosaurins.
Saurolophines and
Saurolophins, yeah, and Lambeosaurins, yeah. Then basically, once you go more basal than those things, which are all part of Hadrosauridae, then yeah, it starts getting a little bit more tricky and messier because, well, it seems to be a lot of pieces of work disagree with one another, so it's like mutually contesting, theories about it, which are very difficult to narrow down for my personal understanding. But anyway, in this particular piece of Alterinus, I could also potentially see some of the females having a similar green coloration as these males do, in fact, and just not having the bright crests. Or vice versa, having a gray colored male with these bright crests. So,
True.
Both ways, in my opinion, could actually work here quite well. So I can see that the author here decided to distinguish them by having females more kind of grayish brownish, while with no coloration on the crest, and males being obviously with the green that seems to stand out a little bit more, which is also fair enough, and it's something that we do in fact see in reptiles quite a lot. We do see that, in fact, quite often. What it's hard to establish is that when it comes to something like crocodilians, which are the only scaly relatives of dinosaurs alive today, we see that they tend to display their dimorphism more in size than they do in coloration, because if I am correct, a good example, Cuvier dwarf caiman, male is bigger than the female, but he does not necessarily have a brighter coloration. Their colorations vary individually rather than based on sexual dimorphism, from what I can see. And it's the same. I think it's true for all crocodilians. We do, however, see, of course, the gharial, the modern day, the only one that is alive from the group. They also have a display structure on their snouts, like these big bumpy things, which Jason talked about in more detail in our Crocodilia video that we recently uploaded. And they are exclusive to males, while females don't have them. So that's one thing that we know is significantly different when it comes to those things. So that could be something somewhat plausible as a parallel to understand when it comes to these kind of crests like we see in Alterinus. So where one is more prominent than the other, if we are to go into this theory of the gender-based attributes, where males are obviously showing off to convince that they have the best genes suitable to for their semen to then be passed on and onto the offspring and etc. You know the drill.
Yep. Yeah, I thought I would just bring up this one because I think it demonstrates how speculation and plausibility can apply even if we don't really know. And there's a lot of ways that you could depict this, again, like you said, with swapped colors and such. But, I think it's just I think it's important to bring this up because speculation and plausibility aren't bad words. You just got to know how to use them properly.
They are tools.
I would
They are
say.
just your tools. That well, I
Yep.
mean, if you're gonna use a screwdriver, for example, uh, to open up and take off, a disc, of your car, you're not using that properly. Then obviously you're supposed to be using a special key for it, right? So
Right.
when you misuse tools, or when you're like, using I don't know, a crowbar, not to pull out the stuck nails, but instead, or opening up, wooden crates, but you're using it to hammer something down, that is obviously a misuse of a tool, and
Yep.
it usually leads to very usually negative or inconvenient consequences. And the same, although I have exaggerated my example slightly to demonstrate the point, but sometimes in these cases same results will be observable when you are misusing uh, the tools that you have also uh, explained earlier on, like speculation and things like that.
Right.
And I also want to one more time highlight that we do not um, aim to come off, or in any way we do not declare ourselves to be the arbiters of what is reasonable and what is not. We
Correct.
expect what is on average to be perceived as reasonable within what science itself would allow.
Right. So I don't know what time we're at the moment. I do want to make sure we get to the big. I feel like the for me the big one for a not podcast, but like a video like this would have to be Tyrannosaurus Rex, because that one seems to be like very controversial in terms of reconstruction. So if you want to go on to that and look at some attempts at reconstructing that, I'd be down.
Okay, let's go with that. I would start with that sculpture picture of the Field Museum's zoo. And
Yes.
I obviously will be speaking, nevertheless, as somebody who has always been a very big admirer of Blue Rhino Studios, who, in this case, I am going to name drop them here. Not necessarily because I wanted to give credit, which is, as we already know, is a good idea to do anyway, but obviously I did already establish that for the purposes of this video we wanted to avoid name dropping, just so we can focus more on the actual depictions. But the
Correct.
reason I am name dropping them and making an exception for them is because of how actually really good they are at their jobs in general, so far, have been at least. And it was to my greatest surprise to discover that I don't know how I can say this without coming off not necessarily entitled, but potentially condescending, which is not what I intend at all, but it might still sound that way, so I just want people to be aware of that. That I don't actually mean to be condescending to them. I'm just trying to, combine, basically interpret my opinion based on what I know and what I believe at least the science tells us is known about Tyrannosaurus. And I cannot get behind this reconstruction attempt in full. There are some parts of it that I find to be particularly good and decent and very reasonable and spot on, but there are some parts of it that I just simply cannot get behind. And I would like to get us to go into slightly more detail on that, if you don't mind. And I would like to obviously start from the first part, which is the most defining part. And that's usually the head. If you get the head wrong, that's where everything else falls apart pretty much, no matter how well it's done. But if the head is wrong, that's it, it's over. And With the head, there is multiple parts. The things that I personally liked is the skin integument generally. That part I'm actually quite happy about. Let's just say it's one of the ways to do it, which I think works. Now, I'm not entirely certain whether or not the nostril orientation is something that fits what Whitmer's work has done, and it actually, to my surprise, looks a lot more similar to what we see in Jurassic Park T-Rex than what we would expect to see in the actual correct, if I were to say, and consistent with Whitmer's work reconstructions of theropod nostril orientation as well. And the other things that I like are the brows, lacrimals. Those are very much something that is within the scope of what I could see Tyrannosaurus having. Jugals seem to be quite okay as well, and the same with the nasal thickening, if you will. That whole part is perfectly fine. The ear placement, which is still debated, by the way, quite a lot with different people, so it's hard to say, but generally it seems that this is where they position it, so I could probably say, based on what I understand, I would say it's a pass, but my knowledge on that particular topic is very limited, so please bear that in mind. Now, here is where I'm going to start pointing out the problems. So, of course, as I already mentioned, that the nostril orientation is dubious and does not look like it's consistent with Whitmer's work of 2001, which should, in my opinion, be used a lot more often for people who are using this, for trying to make reconstructions. The other problem, of course, is, and I know this for a fact, that this reconstruction attempt actually shows presence of extraoral tissue on theropods, and Tyrannosaurus is another theropod and generally Tyrannosauridae, that have big teeth and, well, yes, we're not gonna beat the dead horse with these arguments anymore, but we do not have any evidence and any work that can actually give us any reasons to actually believe that they should have these kind of features. And of course, the eyes, in my opinion, are made to look a little bit more like they don't look very predatory to me. That is my problem with the head overall. Which, if you really think about it, it's not many problems, but they seem to be quite significant that pretty much ruin the general impression of the animal's depiction for me here. And of course I can go into saying that the lower posture is just way too low. It's like the legs are either placed too high or the torso is placed too low for what it should be. So do you want to add anything on that before I start bringing up images of the skeletal reconstructions to better demonstrate what I mean when I talk about the posture?
Sure. If I may go back to the head, I really want to emphasize the eyes because of all the issues that I have with when it comes to dinosaur reconstructions and depictions, and this could just be a very personal thing for me. If you make eyes that look cartoony or very, I don't want to say innocent, but it's very obvious that I don't look at this thing and again, this is very subjective. This is not necessarily very scientific of me to be doing, but I don't look at this thing and think this is an animal that instilled fear into whatever it was interacting with, or it doesn't come off to me like an animal that again, like what RC says, the eyes just don't look very predatory. It kind of, I think I've heard the depiction or description that it kind of makes a T-Rex look like a dog, especially with those lips. And it's like Tyrannosaurus Rex was not a dog. This thing, I'm not saying it needed to have big evil red eyes, but it probably would have had something closer to what a crocodile or bird of prey would have had. And there's a whole discussion that could be had as to why they put like these cutesy blue eyes and the big lips on this T-Rex that I'm not going to get into because that's not necessarily the point. But it really takes away from what I personally feel is, I guess you could say, the essence of what Tyrannosaurus Rex is, which is one of the largest terrestrial carnivores of all time, with the most powerful bite force of any terrestrial carnivore, um, and literally the apex carnivore of all of Western North America in the last few million years of the Mesozoic era. If I were to be told all those things and then be presented with this, especially with those eyes and those lips, I would, and I no disrespect to Blue Rhino Studios because I typically love their stuff, but I personally would think that something was off. Something was very off about those
Yes.
descriptors.
Yeah.
And I'm not even trying to do this to hype up T-Rex. I'm basing this off of what I know of Tyrannosaurus Rex. And part of the reason why I love it so much as a dinosaur and an animal is that, yeah, it was very powerful, it was very big, and it was very successful. And this just does not convey it for me. And again, that's very subjective, not very scientific, but in a way, I almost feel like there's a subjective part of it that could still be applied to get your point across while still being accurate. And that's my thing with the eyes and the face as a whole. And I agree with the posture. The thing about Sue's skeleton, as how it's shown in the Field Museum, is that I feel like the gastralia, the lower part of the ribs, comes down a little bit too low, and it's demonstrated here. And the issue that I have with that is it makes it look like Sue would have had a very awkward time walking when you have a distended belly like that and you've got these big, powerful legs. And, Tyrannosaurus Rex was very big, even by large theropod dinosaur standards. And I've occasionally described it as stocky, although I don't know how accurate that would be. But it was very heavily built, very muscular, and much more robust than other theropods like Giganotosaurus or Carcharodontosaurus or Spinosaurus.
Contrary
And
to
part of
what
that was
many actually believe.
right, right. It was it was very much like a very robust animal, and that was partially because of what it was hunting. But it wasn't like chunky, or to quote like the word that me and my friends use in jest, thick
Yeah.
with infinite C's. We don't. I would not describe Tyrannosaurus Rex as that. It was robust, but it was also a very fit animal, and um, so in this case, it kind of makes it look like Tyrannosaurus Rex would have had a very difficult time walking, and I don't think that would have been the case, especially given um, the skeletal reconstructions that we have to present as well. So if you want to move on to those, I just wanted to get that off my chest.
Sure. So let's actually. By the way, to quickly point out something that I thought is fairly decent, I think the arms are done fairly decently. And I also think that the legs, actually, and the feet look quite okay to me. I don't see a problem specifically with them, personally. Maybe you
Yeah,
can
they
find
look all right.
something, but when you look at the feet and the legs, I think they look perfectly fine.
They look
And the
alright
arms.
to me.
As for color choices, of course, I'm always a bit biased towards more like a greenish type of colors with variations of either more colder green or more warmer green, where depending on maybe the location and what sort of places they were at. But because, as you correctly said, they were very successful and they roamed a large part of Western North America, uh, and the habitats that they went across were quite diverse, in fact more diverse than many people might probably believe they were. And we also have evidence that reptiles do in fact adapt eventually their coloration to their environments. And as a well-known example for this anyway, we see this in rattlesnakes when they shed their skin, how they gradually started showing a different scalation color if you were to relocate them, which is seen between the eastern and the western diamondback rattlesnakes. But for all intents and purposes, they are actually exactly the same animal. They're just named differently because obviously they each display different adaptations and their locations. But they're not, as far as I know, different species really. They are actually the same animal exactly. So,
Gotcha.
same, and again, this is something that you could reasonably apply to put some extinct animals as a general feature that they would adapt to their environments to best implement it to its advantage while they were still around and still successful.
Right.
Now, let's, as you suggested, grab a skeletal reconstruction, and that's the one where it shows Tyrannosaurus Sioux from both the side and the top view with some attributes on the right hand side. Over there you will find that image in your chat.
Got it.
So now look at, obviously we have to, understand and maybe bear in mind that the positioning of this one is a bit more neutral. It's basically what it would have been in its normal standing, walking maybe pose. And now even if it leans, I somehow struggle to see this type of drastic lowering of the gastralia, the lowering of, the lower side of the belly, if you will, of the torso, to go so far below the kneecaps, if you will, below the knees.
Yeah.
Like, yes, sure, it would go below slightly, for sure, but not quite as far as almost down to the point where the shin and ankle joints are.
Right, it would not have been as drastic as what the sculpture makes it out to be.
If they lifted it up a little bit more, in my opinion, this would actually not have looked half bad in that sense, at least from the posturing point of view.
Yeah.
Now, also, this shows that the there seems to be a lot of extra mass added. Maybe that is one of the things that we are seeing on the actual sculpture, because obviously the skeleton doesn't seem to add that amount of mass. But then again, we have to remember, while it was a massive theropod for its standards, generally even for Tyrannosaur standards, it was pretty massive, and it was still a theropod. It did not have, like, probably a huge amount of, fat that it would have, like a saggy belly of some kind. I don't know how else to describe it, but it seems to me like they made it overly thick, as you correctly pointed out. Now, I wanted to move on to the next reconstruction attempts made by other people for a Tyrannosaurus Rex, which I personally consider to be very, let's just say, close to the realm of possibility. And one of them is a CGI grayscale model that is basically facing the left-hand side.
Alright, got that up.
Yep. So, if you notice very carefully, you will see the level of where the knees are. I don't know if this model specifically represents you, however. It could be a different specimen, or it could just be a composite generic representation attempt of an adult Tyrannosaurus Rex. So I don't actually know if it specifically represents any specimen per se. What I can see, however, is that the mass is clearly well displayed, while the muscular features of the limbs are very clearly well defined. And we also see a very well defined features on its snout and regarding its facial integument. Although nostril, once again, orientation, I'm putting that as a dubious, as it's a very common thing that seems that a lot of artists miss for some reason. But this is an older piece of work, although it probably is not as old as 2001, so I don't know why a lot of people, even since 2001, are still choosing to depict the nostrils in this way. Beats me, but it is what it is. Everything else aside of that, I cannot really see any major issues on it. It seems to me like this is another alternative view on Tyrannosaurus that I would definitely accept. At least on my calculator, if you will, I would accept as a reasonable attempt at reconstruction.
I would agree. I think I meant to point this out with the Sue sculpture, but considering how big her abdomen is, her thighs or her legs do not appear like they look rather small for being able to support such a massive stomach area, whereas on the left hand facing T-Rex, the thighs and the leg muscles, like basically the muscular distribution is a lot more, I guess, reasonable because it looks like the legs could actually propel this thing forward, whether it's on a walk or just keep propel it forward in any kind of movement. Whereas with Sue, the issue there is that her thighs, the structure, the sculpture there, they don't look like they would be able to support something of that size. They would have to be much bigger, and by that point, it's, I don't know, it just something I noticed in comparing the two, the size of their thighs there.
Yeah, that's another thing. I noticed that a lot of times, for some reason, Sioux skeleton seems to be, well, maybe misinterpreted as having ridiculously small legs whenever anybody attempts to do a fleshed out attempt to reconstruct Sioux specimen. And while it may be true that as they get older, proportionally their bodies become bigger and more massive in contrast to their limbs, because hind limbs, or really massive hind limbs, and they tend to be more juvenile traits. That is something that we definitely can see where it happens. If you look at Jane, for example, it's very obvious that these specimens' hind limbs are very, very proportionally big. And
Right.
as they show later in ontogeny studies of T-Rex, which you've seen in Dr. Thomas Carr's work, they start changing that proportion. And obviously when you look at before and after, there is a lot of difference. And that's true actually for pretty much every theropod that has been shown to have any kind of growth series of any sort that I believe is consistent all the way through. Now, one thing I wanted to also bring up on the screen is this time we're going to focus on specific features, as the image itself unfortunately is not full body, but it's the pencil sketch of a Tyrannosaurus which is facing right hand side and it's just got the head, parts of the torso and its arms.
Got that.
So what you will be seeing now, guys, is basically this right here. Now what I wanted to point out, first I wanted to point out what I think is wrong before we get into all the other bits, because mostly I'm actually very happy with it. Now first one is, if you were to continue the drawing of the torso, it looks exceedingly massive in terms of the size and proportion. It will be absolutely huge, which just would not be very consistent with the skeletal measurements of a Tyrannosaurus rex. So it's clear that some of these markers are quite off in that regards. And also I'm doubting the curvature and the sharpness of the claws on the I mean, they could be sharp, but about the curvature I'm not so certain on the actual arms, because from what I know, at least from what I've seen, I do not believe that their claws were that curvy.
Yeah, now that you mentioned it, they do look a little bit closer to, they almost look like what you would see on a dromaeosaur, or even like a Allosaur claw more so than a Tyrannosaurus Rex, which, yeah, not to downplay the fact that they were sharp, because they were sharp, but I'm not sure if they would have been like that sickle shaped, or if there would have been a little bit less of a curve there.
By the way, this is another interesting comparison that if you remember why I also, when I said that Blue Rhino Sioux sculpture, what they did is, well, they did not make the mistake of making them like this.
Hmm.
So if you will know, if you open up that image, and I will bring it up once again just to focus more on the arms, you will notice that Blue Rhino Sioux sculpture did not actually make that mistake. Yes, there is a
Yeah.
bit of curvature, but it's still not overly curved. It just
Right.
looks like it's continuing what would be reasonably expected from the claws. And their claws could in fact vary slightly in curvature, but I just haven't seen a forearm, considering how forearms are actually not very commonly found in Tyrannosaurus specimens, by the way. That's a thing that should be noted. They are not as common as many people might think in terms of their preservations. So there are only been maybe a handful of them that actually got preserved fully. So
Gotcha.
to bring back, not this one, sorry, not the going back to that same image of the pencil sketch that we had before. So aside from these issues with the torso position and proportion and the claws on the arms, I also wanted to point out I'm struggling to understand if the arms are kind of still tucked inwards, so they're still adjacent to the body rather than being tucked outwards, like almost like it's like imitating a birdie movement of the wings, which I don't really know if I support necessarily in this case, because some people seem to be very hellbent on doing this type of depiction, and I don't necessarily understand why. Because the arms, from my understanding, positions, it seems to me a bit more natural. And again, I mean, I don't know what this is meant to represent, because I cannot tell if this is meant to be a neutral pose or not. If it's a neutral pose, I'm doubtful. If it's not a neutral pose, or maybe if it's posturing to somebody, as in like another individual of some kind, maybe the Tyrannosaurus or something else, there could maybe be a reasonable doubt. I don't know. So I'm not 100% sure. I'm not gonna make a call because it's unclear from the picture. But having said that, I think we can move on to the positive sides of this particular attempt at Tyrannosaurus. And I don't even know if this is necessarily meant as a reconstruction, more so as just a drawing, but coincidentally it does actually seem to look like there's quite a lot of things that I personally would very much approve, especially if you look at the teeth. The size of the teeth specifically looks very spot on. The only thing I would potentially point out, maybe, is I am not certain if the lower jaws, the dentary teeth, are as big as the maxillary, the top ones, because they look like they should be smaller to me, from what I know. And also,
They do look.
the
I was
thickness
just.
of the, look at the amount of mass on the lower jaw versus the upper one as
Yeah.
well. There is quite a bit of a disparity here, I think.
Yeah, it definitely looks like, yeah, the teeth look very big for being the lower jaw, and also like the jaw itself is like packing some pretty sick muscles. And I could forgive that if the top jaw had a bit more musculature there, which I think would even things out. Um but yeah, I think for me the teeth sort of stick out a little bit more because of just how, and again, T-Rex had very big teeth, but the
Oh, the
lower half I
biggest
don't know
of
if they would
all,
be.
really.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if they would have had teeth, at least in the dentary, the lower jaw. I'm not sure if they would have been that big, unless you wanted to argue that they were they were going through the process of being replaced, and so they were sticking out a little bit more but I'm not sure if that was the artist's intention or not. So
Yeah,
take that with a grain of salt.
yeah, I would agree with that. It's the same thing. I'm not actually sure what is meant to be representing, just as I'm generally not sure what this meant to be showing off. But if you look at how the gradient effects are done on the eye, if you look very carefully, I do think that even though it doesn't, obviously it's not a color drawing, it does show like it looks, at least based on the expression, it looks very predatory to me. And that is a
Yes,
very important thing to me.
yes, I love the eyes. This thing looks like I just could see this thing walking around and having those eyes that it screams everything I would imagine a Tyrannosaurus Rex would look like. And again, I know it might be a personal thing, but eyes can sometimes make or break a depiction for me. And on this one, whether or not it's intended to be a reconstruction, the eyes are I'd say they're solid. They are I don't know I don't often say I don't want to say perfect, but they are very very close, at least in my opinion, to just what I would imagine a Tyrannosaurus Rex's eyes would be like.
Yes, and also let's go to the point about the nostril. They notice that the orientation is still more forward leaning, even though I would still probably do a slightly different shape if it were up to me. But it's
Yeah,
more or less closer to what we see in Dr. Whitmer's work than what we've seen in the previous one, that's you from Blue Rhino Studios, which they seem to have made similar type of depiction like what I've seen in Jurassic Park, very much so, and many other depictions that depict similar type of nostril shapes, which I think
yeah,
are wrong. Now, for the final image of Tyrannosaurus, I want you to bring up this brown on a white background image, and I think this is very close to what I would call a really great looking depiction of Tyrannosaurus Rex. Notice something very interesting about it, and the first thing I notice is that look, that it doesn't have anything that is overly pronounced in terms of stylized, choices on
right.
any parts. It's extremely kind of conservative, neutral, if you will, and yet it reflects exactly what is seen. It has big teeth, although it does seem to display some partial lips on the upper side of things, on the upper jaw. But
Yeah,
if you notice on the lower jaw, there is the same kind of space allocated for these upper teeth to rest in when the jaw is closed, as it was done in that Allosaurus gimansoni portrait.
yeah,
So it's a very similar approach they're using, and it's no wonder because I'm not naming, as we agree, as I said, since we're not name dropping, I would just say that it's the same author who done that, to my knowledge. So no wonder why we see some similar, if you will, handwriting on these depictions. Now, once again, I am more biased towards green colorations, but these type of brown, drab type of colorations are probably very possible because the diversity of their environment was extremely vast, in a sense that you could find these types perhaps in more open kind of plains where there was a lot more of dirt than there was vegetation, while you could find some of the more maybe greener looking ones in the more further north, whereas you go closer to Canada perhaps. But that is my pet idea. That is not something that you should take as a stance, if you will. It's not my declaration of a stance. It is just what I see personally, and because I am a bit biased in favor of green in general.
right.
So I'm letting people know for sure, so that they know what's going on. Otherwise, yes, this is probably going to be quite easily my favorite um, depiction of all the ones we have featured over here, along with that other grayscale one that we have showed the CGI model.
Yeah.
There may
I
be some
think
other ones that I could find that I like quite a lot, But if I were to say closest to what I can call a very nicely done, reasonable, conservative, or whatever else you want to call it, scientific reconstruction, I think this one fits very well. And again, nostrils orientation while it's facing forward. I don't know if I would want it to be like this or if I would prefer if it were a bit more closed up towards the front. But that is something I'm just simply I don't think I'm gonna be able to reliably answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
would
what,
say
what do you,
that
what do you
this
wanna?
is.
Yeah, I was gonna say what you want to add if you have any words about this particular piece.
I'd say I'd say it's pretty much solid. Um, I think it would be interesting to see it in like a natural habitat, like if the artist were to take this and it's a very similar, if not the same exact design, and put it in like a, let's say for sake of hypothetical, for sake of a hypothetical that this were one of the southern kinds of T-Rex that may have had a little bit drier color because the environment was more semi-arid. I think that would be interesting to see, just because I like it when you have um, full-bodied animals like this with a natural prehistoric background. But aside from that, I like it. I guess I'm a little iffy on the half lips, but I'm also someone who likes the prehistoric kingdom, Tyrannosaurus Rex, and that one has half lips, so I'm willing to forgive it. Yeah, generally,
Yeah. I've made the same. I've made the same concession here as well. I accepted
yeah,
that compromise, all things considered, given everything else, how solid it looks, and I literally just don't have any issues with it. Of course, I don't know how Jason and Jeffrey would look at it, or how Dr. Thomas Carr or Holtz would look at it. Uh, Holtz is probably one of the most forgiving in many ways, so he would probably look at it and say that's the best ever, maybe potentially. But if Dr. Carr looked at it, who knows how he would look at it? He could probably say it's amazing, or he could say it's completely rubbish and point something that we never noticed, and it might potentially change our view as well. So it's quite possible. But overall, I would say that of all the ones that we have shown, this is probably my personal favorite. I could um, find potentially other piece that I would like your opinion on, and this is actually a very random one because I
okay,
did not prepare that in advance. I only just remembered of it, so I wanted to
sure,
bring that up. But while we do that, if you want, before I send it to you in the chat and bring it up on the screen, uh, if you don't mind, would you like to carry on the discussion? If do you have any more things to say, and in the meantime I will look for the image.
sure. Well, real briefly, I'll mention that I think in terms of body, this Tyrannosaurus Rex is on point. I think if I had to pick the head, my favorite head would be the grayscale pencil drawing, or not grayscale, but the pencil drawing one. I just think there's so much personality to it that I really like. But in terms of body, I like the last one we talked about, and then also the grayscale CGI one. There's plenty of good Tyrannosaurus Rex depictions out there, but there seems to be a bit of a flow of some of them looking like they've got like, again, the lips and such, and I'm not really gonna beat that horse again because everyone does, or it's been done so many times that
It's
but yeah,
become
it's just
cliche
nice.
already, hasn't
It's
it?
become cliche. It's become cliche, and it's always nice to see a Tyrannosaurus Rex that, kind of looks like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. All right, so let me take a look at this. I think I've seen this before, but let me. Okay, so admittedly, this is very cursory, but I like the body.
Let me
The
bring that up first. So let's do the first image,
Oh yeah, oh
and
yeah, yeah.
I think this one is kind of sort of facing us a little bit more, and we will go through
Yes,
all of them to just get the sense of the angles. So
sure.
first one, uh, now this is actually a 3D print, like it's a 3D image, but it was actually done for a model kit that was made by this Showana studio, and unfortunately it was very limited run, and I believe it was 1 to 15 scale. which
Okay.
is not the scale size I personally collect. But if it were 1 to 20 scale, I would probably be very much signing up to grab it because I do actually very much love this piece. But if anything, this could potentially inspire me on how I would do my Tyrannosaurus sculpture whenever I get around to doing one.
Yeah.
So at least it's a pointer to where I kind of want to take it. Not in every way, when I will point out maybe where I might refrain on some things, but we will get to that in a moment. So what are your thoughts from this image, first one?
For starters, I think proportionally it looks pretty good. I would say the legs don't look. I mean, the body doesn't look too big. The legs look like you could propel or move this thing. The tail and the head look evenly. Like I could believe like on a um, strictly from a muscular standpoint, this is a very well balanced dinosaur. Very believable animal in the sense of how it's built in terms of its physicality. My biggest head scratching moment, beard stroking moment. I don't actually have a beard, but I is the kinds of like spikes, not maybe not spikes, but like the little bits and bobs that stick out on the back. There's one
They're all
that's
over the body, actually, if you look at
they're
it
all over the
closely.
body, yeah, primarily the back, yeah, all over the body, primarily in the back, and I'm kind of iffy on that just because maybe I'm just biased towards Tyrannosaurus rexes that don't have that, but it is pretty speculative, and I'm not sure what to make of that. Like, I'm not saying it's bad. I just don't know how to feel about it.
I'm the
Because it
same.
is.
Because here's the thing, like look at, I would be willing to pass even the depiction of the brows and lacrimals, and all the nasal like bits, basically everything on the head. I would probably give it a general pass for me. Although I would make the teeth on the upper jaw a bit bigger, which we will get to from a different image when we get a different angle. So bear with us on that. But when it comes to the back of the neck and all of these different like sticking bits that are sticking out, all over the body. While we do have not a lot of maybe, of course, samples of the Tyrannosaur skin, but we do have some from different areas at least, and they don't show this type of skin. This type of scale. It's more kind of just normal, small, very small looking, kind of, like it would have looked almost smooth from a distance, perhaps, if we were to look at it from a certain distance. In real life, it wouldn't, you know, look very obviously bumpy if we are looking at it from a distance. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there would be maybe some folds there and then, but like you wouldn't see these like dragon-esque type of scales or spiky bits like that. That's probably
Right.
my one of my major gripes with it, is like, why did they have to just go for that? It's not like it would not have looked really great without it, but I guess, well, they just had to because of reasons. Um,
Yeah.
Now I wanted to also move on to the second image, which is the one from a different side, basically from a completely. If you were to find the second image of it,
It's on facing the left
yeah,
more
it's gonna be
so.
facing the left exactly,
Okay.
and here it may be slightly difficult to see, but if you were to zoom in a little bit, notice that for some reason, and I personally struggle to understand why, but the teeth on the upper jaw are kind of shrunk a little bit. And this is, by the way, based on specimen Scotty, just so you know.
Okay.
And I find that to be a little bit bizarre, that it's, you know, got a shrunk teeth. This is what we've talked about, by the way, as well. Even though this
Yeah.
model, in fact, positively was confirmed to me by the author, that it doesn't have that type of lip model. It's actually like if it were to close the, you know, mouth, it would be an overbite, like we normally would see or expect to see, if you will. so
Yeah.
it's not a lipped model. But that's my weird kind of point about the skull itself, about the head in particular. Like, I'm even willing to pass somewhat pointy, and if we go to the next image right after that, it's once again facing right, but it's a zoomed out version. Oh, you can go for the zoomed in version. Just go straight for the zoomed in version.
Okay.
So as you can see, that this is the zoomed in version on the head, and we even get to see some detailing on the arms and some detailing on the legs. Arms and legs, by the way, I'm very happy with. In fact, I think they're 100% spot on. Like, it's exactly how I would personally want to do it if I were doing it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But regarding the head, I would argue that maybe, I don't know, maybe the eyes are slightly supposed to be closed, but they should be more round rather than oval. If they are in a neutral kind of, position, unless it's meant to slightly kind of, you know, sort of close them almost, but halfway.
Yeah, I don't know if that is because of the eyelids or if that's just.
Yeah.
I'm leaning towards eyelids to get for the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah,
but
same here,
they
yeah.
definitely look more. They definitely look a bit more ovally than what I would expect.
Yeah, they're more like
Tyrannosaurus
almond
Rex
shaped,
eye.
but they're
Yeah.
not supposed to be almond shaped really. They're supposed to be round. And the other thing that I kind of find this nostril somewhat interesting, the way they chose to do it and how it blends in with the rest of the rough parts of the skull, of the head, I mean. And of course the jugal, the brows, the nasal, like they decided to do, rather than doing the smooth approach to it, they decided to go for the pointier. This is another interesting thing because we don't have any actual preservation of the full-on, like a mummy of some kind, to show if there was any type of thing like that. But on the other hand, I find this to be interesting if this could have potentially been more indicative of a male feature, while the smoother types, and thus maybe even they would not have stood out in any kind of coloration either, would have been a more female, versions of it, if you will.
Right.
Like, say, imagine if this thing was colored. Well, I'm gonna just go for green. I know that everybody's probably sick of me talking about, how I'm biased towards green, but I kind of don't care. I'm gonna talk about it, so take it if you want, But yeah, let's say if you color the whole thing green-ish with various kind of gradients, and then you apply maybe some kind of color like a beige or of some kind, with some black kind of under highlights or whatever, that could make it stand out a little bit. While on a female, for example, it would kind of just be a bit more plain and drab, that blends in a bit more with the rest of the head.
Yeah.
So it's kind of just like my idea from this, it just kind of drove me to that. But I don't know. Other than that, I'm generally happy with this sculpt and this work. So this is kind of another one that is very close candidate. But if I were to really, really say what I would personally choose, it would be something in between this one and that brown one, the full body on the white background, which I'm gonna go bring back up right now to remind the viewers.
Yeah.
It would be something basically between these two, for me. That would be my probably perfect Tyrannosaurus Rex.
True. I think, actually, while you were talking, I quickly looked up this quote, and I think this really applies to, this applies to paleo art in general, in terms of reconstructions in general, and it's by Vince Lombardi. The quote goes, "Gentlemen, we will chase perfection, and we will chase it relentlessly, knowing all the while we can never attain it. But along the way, we shall catch excellence." And that's actually an extended version of what I first heard it, which was, "We will chase perfection, along the way we can catch excellence." And I I think the very fact that dinosaurs and other prehistoric animals are extinct is enough reason to say that we will never be able to perfectly reconstruct any of these animals, but we can come we can make excellent attempts at it. And I have my personal gripes with and I'm kind of picky because Tyrannosaurus Rex is my favorite dinosaur,
Same here, yeah.
but yeah, but with that being said, like I'd still be fine with the model here of Scotty, and I'm fine with the brown and the white background there. Both do. There's a lot that's right about them, um, and and I think that's something to keep in mind with paleo art because, uh, again, we're not going to get a perfect reconstruction of any of these animals,
I
but we can
think
come
just we can
close to
just
getting.
assume at this point that we are gonna have errors regardless.
Yep.
Like this is
Yep.
gonna be a given fact at this point. We cannot. It's not even worth mentioning, but I'll mention it anyways in case people are getting the wrong idea. Like there is absolutely no way we will be able to get it perfectly right. It's just not
Right.
gonna happen. We have to just accept that. At least for today's possibilities and standards, how far we can go, we just have to accept that.
Yeah. Which I almost feel like I don't know if there is anything else in particular you wanted to go over, but I think that it actually serves as a nice segue into whatever concluding thoughts we may have on the subject. And I don't want to cut it short, but I just feel like we've gone over quite a bit of what works for a reconstruction and what doesn't.
Well,
And
yeah, the whole point
um,
of this video, in my opinion, was to just show what we see qualifies as a reconstruction and what else just doesn't kind of cut it. Basically, it's just way too far from that level where it can be uh, taken seriously, if I will, not necessarily to slam dunk. I've kind of, if you noticed, those who are viewing the channel, that I've slowly been kind of stepping away from my old school, if you will, style of slam dunking on reconstructions, but or just art, but more like I'm trying to just be as reasonable at this point as I can be, rather than just going obnoxiously ranty as I used to do. So I
yeah,
have changed my style a little bit for a while, and maybe it might not be to everybody's liking. Some people may have come to the channel because they actually want to see these type of ranty videos, which I don't seem to be doing quite a lot of. In fact, I haven't done one for ages anyway. But I'm gonna be leaving the rants more to things like when I'm gonna get to reviewing Camp Cretaceous Season 4, which I still haven't got around to do it, because I just simply can't bring myself to waste my time on watching it, but I'll have to, because I promised. And because it's a tradition of this channel, we have to do it. And
yeah,
and the other one is obviously when the Jurassic World Dominion comes out, and that's actually one of the things I wanted to say here. One of the reasons I haven't reviewed the trailer is because I want to actually wait for the final products to come out and actually do a review of the final product. So I don't want to necessarily, I don't have any incentives to milk anything out of it because I don't monetize my videos since, I don't have, I'm not eligible for monetization, and because YouTube is not my job. I just do it whenever I have
yeah,
time, just for fun, and it's just part of the way that me and my fellow like mods and other members in the community can have a bit of fun with things and just sometimes use it as an opportunity to talk about things that many people don't talk about. So, and taking 2+ hours doing so as well at that. There we go. So
yeah,
there's that. And I also wanted to say that this video pretty much would establish what me and John generally see like as the criteria of how we are going to look at things in the future. And as I said before, and I will have to repeat it just to kind of bring a bit more emphasis to it, that me and John are gonna be doing a segment of reviewing different pieces, uh, like the documentaries. We might even do the movies, in fact, as well at some point, if we decide to. Like, we could definitely like have a field day going about those Speckles the Torvosaurus movies.
Oh boy,
Yeah.
man, do I have a lot to say to that?
Yeah, we could definitely have a field day on that, and that could be quite entertaining, in fact. I mean, I'm almost willing to say that even, like, shall we even include Camp Cretaceous Season 4 as one of our segments as well, or shall I just do that one on my own since I've done the previous ones by myself already? But,
Well, to be honest, I have not watched Camp
yeah, so
Cretaceous
you
at
don't
all,
really.
so yeah, I don't know how much I could really contribute without having seen the first three seasons, so
But you will be able to contribute to things like Walking with Dinosaurs, obviously, and
oh yeah, oh
When
yeah,
Dinosaurs Roamed America, and like what the
yep.
other ones is like Clash of or something like that.
Clash of the
Yes,
Dinosaurs,
yes, yes. Basically all of that
Dinosaur
stuff.
Planet, yeah.
Dinosaur Planet, and then the other one is Planet Dinosaur. So
Oh yeah,
both
yep,
of these.
Planet
So yeah,
Dinosaur,
all of these could potentially be our parts in installments, each episode by episode, basically, uh,
for sure.
as per installment. And yeah, these are the things, guys, you can look forward to from me and John. Occasionally, we might bring a third one in as well, but they won't be the regulars probably for the whole show. It will be us two that will be the main guys for that show. Anyone else from our moderators team or some of the more like active and prominent members of my community, maybe they might occasionally, if they decide to, if they have something to contribute, be it entertainment value or just some good ideas, they might occasionally join too, if they desire so. But mostly it's gonna be us two. So yeah, wait, wait patiently for the review segments of these different media pieces, and maybe if you want us to review any specific pieces of work, so long as they are not, like the child sort of drawings type of things, because I don't want to waste my time on that kind of stuff. Uh, but something of this type of grade quality, if you will. And if you want our thoughts on the depictions, you can let us know. And if we gather maybe a pile of them, we could just do like a video as well as a part to just review these reconstructions and just give us our opinions on them at the very end of the day.
Yeah.
So I think we can pretty much wrap this up unless you have something to add to what I said.
I guess I'll conclude with this regarding reconstructions is that, and I think this will be a nice way to just wrap things in a bit of a bow here. Reconstructions is not like something that should be, I guess, feared necessarily, because I think maybe you've been part of this, but I've seen discussions where people will say, well, isn't that just a very narrow-minded view of what a reconstruction is? And when people describe what that's supposed to mean, and it's really not. What it's supposed to mean is literally what I tried defining earlier in the video, which is a process by which scientific principles and physical evidence come together to try and recreate some kind of um, in the definition it was a past occurrence or event, but in this case it's animals. And it's not just something where it's like, oh, well, I can just throw on whatever I want on this animal and it will still be fine because I misuse the words accuracy and plausibility and believability. You're trying to, it's not like this over the top, narrow minded word or definition. It's following what's there. And if it's not there, you have to either be careful about how you apply it, or just admit that what you're making is, to quote my friend, fan fiction, and not necessarily a dinosaur that I can use to show my kids, my friends, my family, and say this is what a T-Rex would look like, or an Allosaurus, or a Pachyrhinosaurus. So I want to just get that out there just to wrap things up, because again, I don't think reconstruction is. It's not a. It's a very misused term, and I think it's easy to use it in the proper context. So, but other than that, I definitely look forward to doing more videos with you on documentaries and looking them over with a fine-tooth comb and seeing, how well they stand the test of time. So.
Yes, the whole idea will be to review them based on what if they were made exactly the same way as we see them, but in modern day, if you will, based on what we know today.
Right.
So,
Yep.
and yeah, well, thanks for joining me today, and I suppose we could wrap this one up. And guys, of course, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe, and if you are not entirely sure what's going on, post your comments below. I'll try my best to answer them, and if John is around here, he can answer them for me as well, as he's one of my moderators and partially represents this community and my channel too, to a certain degree. So, with that said, thanks for watching, and I will look forward to seeing you guys in the next video, and hopefully the first installment of mine and John's segment on our reviews of these different pieces. So, with that said, you guys take care, and bye bye. I will see you guys later.
Sounds good. See you guys later.